Hi. I am so excited to introduce you today to someone who has been a longtime friend of the UIA, someone who has been an inspiration to the UIA back in the day, and now is an ally as we advance work to rethink how we hand off college to career for our students, regardless of their background. So that person I get to bring you is Dr. Michelle Weise, who is the Chief Innovation Officer and the Senior Vice President at Strada Education Network. Welcome, Dr. Michelle.
Thank you. Hey, Bridget.
It's so exciting. It's so awesome to finally find time when we could both be on here together.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
So because for those who don't know, Michelle and I are frequently at events around the country, but never, we're always on the road. So I'm hoping that you are in a place that feels like home-ish or not on the road today. That's a pretty exciting.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so for folks who don't know, can you first off, your title is way fancy. Senior Officer, Senior Vice President, very fancy. I want to ask you all kinds of questions. But the first thing I want to ask you about is you used to work in an institution. You were also someone who was really charged with helping support innovation at Southern New Hampshire. Now you work on the outside and you actually help coach institutions from afar. I'm curious about if you have any difference of perspective that you see things differently about your prior life, or if there's something that you just wish, boy, I wish others would figure out as I'm trying to coach them.
Yeah. So I've actually had this really unique position where I've inhabited not only just sort of that administrator role within a really innovative university, but I actually started off my career as a professor. And then worked for an ed tech startup, helping service members transition out of the military into civilian careers, worked for Clayton Christensen's think tank on disruptive innovation. And so I've almost inhabited every single stakeholder position except for a policymaker. So what that has enabled me to do is just have a lot of empathy for the different kinds of circumstances and the barriers confronting different stakeholders as they try to innovate in this space between education and work. And so obviously being on the funder side is unique, and it's great to be well-resourced so that we can actually drive innovation and seed investments where we think they're lacking. So to me, I think it's so important to understand that, with any kind of change and any sort of innovation initiative, you can just kind of go in there and just sort of expect some sort of top-down strategy to work. It really does have to be both kind of, leadership driven, but also bottom up. And so that's the unique kind of, I think, conundrum of trying to drive change within higher ed specifically, is that needs to occur in a pretty balanced way.
I totally agree. I feel like it's it's almost like a project obsession that I see at universities, where instead of really thinking about the total arc and trajectory of how we're going to innovate and improve our institutions, we don't think about building ground support. We don't think about kind of getting buy-in. We're going to do X initiative, and it's a project, and then we're going to implement it, and we're going to be done. And when I come in and I look around at all these different projects that are going on, it feels to me like, have you ever, you walk in the gym and there's someone who's just doing really weird stuff with the equipment. But you're technically using the equipment, but I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but it's just the weird, I've got a GIF that I'm now using to describe how the universe, they're like the weird dude at the gym who's just giving it the college try, but we're doing anything. So anyway, so I completely agree with you. I want to follow up and ask you, so your job is, you run is an institute about the future of work.
Mm-hmm.
So I am hoping that you can talk a little about that work, but also what have you learned that you wish institutions understood about what they need to do differently to prepare students for the future of work?
Yeah, so I work for a larger company called Strada Education Network, which is a nonprofit public charity that is, essentially trying to improve people's lives by connecting education to work and trying to build more purposeful pathways there. And so the institute that I lead, which is called Strada Institute for the Future of Work, is meant to sort of try to understand better what needs to happen in terms of the transformation of education to meet the needs of this very uncertain world of work ahead of us. And so part of the research that we do in this space is also coupled with research on the education consumer journey. We don't necessarily talk about students as consumers of education, but we're trying to understand that perspective better so we can also understand how we attend to adult learners in particular who need to reskill and retool themselves over a lifetime. So all of this research is meant to drive hopefully more strategic investment by the larger network as a whole. So we are a huge philanthropic funder. We also invest, through private equity, through venture capital. We're a limited partner with multiple venture capital funds. And then we also have a laboratory of affiliate solutions with, on the ground touch points with learners and institutions. So we have MZ, which is an economic modeling company. We have Inside Track, Road Trip Nation, College Confidential, Education at Work, these groups that are attending to that post-secondary learning space. And so all these insights that we try to synthesize. We try to synthesize a lot of the smart research out there being done by, the MIT economists, whom most people don't read. Sort of lay people generally don't read, David Otter's work. It's hard to understand, but it's really important for us to understand. So we're trying to do that synthesis, but we're also trying to bring in some of the work of our affiliates like MZ to understand what are the skills needed for the future of work, and how do you actually prepare, and how do learning providers build more precise educational pathways, and how do employers engage in more skills-based learning or skills-based hiring. So all of that research is meant to inform all of the work that we do as a network.
Awesome. And we, just for those who don't know, we are running a project called the Bridging the Gap from Education to Employment. We're trying to work on the re-engineering side of how you embolden and support career services professionals in reimagining the pathway from college to career. We think that there's just been a fundamentally missing piece, which is the handoff. Having an office that people are supposed to go to is not the same as an intentionally designed process. And I don't know about you, but my college experience, I didn't go to career services, and I basically had to figure it out on my own. And we think that there has to be a better way, and we have to figure out how to reverse engineer privilege so that we're able to support students who are about to graduate, low income, first generation, students of color. They should be getting the fantastic opportunities at all of the, insert here companies. And yet we've seen over time that's not happening. So we're trying to figure out how do we fix that, and how do we do it so that it's not just consultants parachuting in. It's actually people on the ground. How do you support change comprehensively for something like that? So minor piece, but I am curious about as institutions are thinking about, they're hearing about what students are expecting, increased expectations about their classroom experience. They definitely want more hands-on, more active learning, things like that, project-based learning, collaborative environments. Is there any one thing where you see institutions really, there's like the worst, most egregious thing that we need to stop doing, or the most important thing that we should start doing? Is there any on either of those that are like a very clear thing to offer?
Yeah, I think your question is also connected to what you were just talking about before, which is that handoff piece, right? That we tend to fumble it a little bit for our learners, especially that first major transition that they're making. So it's hard for us to then extrapolate from there. If we're not doing it great on the front end of a learner's life, how in the world will we then do it, 15, 20, or 30 times over as we are, increasingly faced with automation and the changing nature of work? And I think what's fascinating is that the through line across all of those transitions and navigating each of those transitions is ultimately what we need to be able to do is be excellent problem solvers. And we have to be able to be kind of nimble and agile and resilient and adaptable in the way that we think. And I think every employer would love to have an employee who could think with and exercise judgment in that very highly ambiguous circumstance. But when we actually try to backtrack from that, that ideal outcome of, this kind of thinker and this kind of sort of nimble, problem solver and systems thinker, is then when we kind of think about how we deliver education, I think the low hanging fruit for for institutions is how we actually do problem-based learning on a more sort of systematic level and a more widespread level. You talked about kind of project-based earlier. We tend to kind of do these really innovative things in pockets where one innovative professor might do some really awesome project-based capstone experience where people have that kind of hands-on learning, right? But we don't do it really systematically across disciplines. We don't try to dismantle sort of our department structures. We have a lot of kind of fiefdoms that emerge, and we have a lot of incentive structures that basically make it so that you are not incentivized to collaborate and co-teach and co-author, right? So I feel like if we really want to be cultivating those systems thinkers, we actually have to create, a disciplinary structure, an interdisciplinary structure that facilitates that kind of deep analogical thinking, because otherwise we're not really preparing our learners to, in the workplace, to be able to take this thing that they've learned over here that maybe seems totally unrelated to the problem they're solving over here, but that you can actually leverage this kind of this range to solve these problems. So I think that's a real opportunity ahead for us, is as we think about learners who desperately want better skills in terms of translating what they know now into the language of the labor market. Part of the way we do that is we teach them how to solve real problems. And in the context of that problem solving, you then understand why these disciplines matter, right? Like how they come into play, because everything that we do today, every problem that we solve is that kind of it's all hybrid, it's all transdisciplinary. We don't think about, oh, I'm going to use this mathematical tool over here, or I'm going to think about this as a chemistry problem. It's all of these different things together at once. So that to me is the most exciting piece of what we can do differently.
So we've actually been, most of our work has been outside the classroom, and I think people sometimes assume that's because we think like that, like it's not, we don't prioritize class. It's actually, frankly, it's fairly intimidating figure. Like, and I also don't think that someone who doesn't actually teach should be walking in and telling people how to run their classrooms. So we're starting with kind of the structural stuff that is somewhat low hanging fruit around redesigning the administration and how our process and stuff. But there's been such interest about how we can engage faculty, and faculty members have been asking for a while. And the one idea that seems to keep percolating, which aligns with what you're saying, is taking a cohort of faculty members through a process of how do you take your typical curriculum, a lecture-based class, and transition it quickly, efficiently, and not too much of a burden on the faculty member who doesn't have any time, into a project-based learning, into in a more active learning classes. That process seems challenging because people talk about like how we want to innovate learning. Well, we have to innovate how we teach learning, because they're just repeating what they see when they're being taught to teach. So that is what I'm hearing. You basically just validated that I think that we should.
Yeah, and it doesn't work, right? If the promotion processes are still tethered to the old way of doing things, right? Because then there's really like all that hard work, and with the limited time that they have, why in the world would they reinvent what is working for their current track of getting promoted, even if it's better for the learner, right? So those things have to be adjusted to the new approach. I think you saw that, right? Like back in 2014, when everyone was playing around with MOOCs, right? You had all these really, excited professors trying to flip the classroom, do all kinds of different things, but none of it was actually getting rewarded, right? None of it was going to benefit them in terms of their trajectory. So I think all those, like, you really do, as much as we want to innovate from within, we also have to make sure that the incentives are aligned.
Yeah, and what I'm curious, have you heard of what incentives would be helpful to add to the tenure process? Because, it depends on what you're talking, but it doesn't include feedback from students, no outcomes relative to the performance of students outside the class, like as they move on, nothing in that space, and it's all very individual, so therefore you would be incentivized to collaborate and work with a different colleague.
Yeah, yes, I think part of it is, right, like the right now so much of it is centered on the professor as an individual, right, as opposed to collaborating in some sort of team or a group. And so that's one piece. There's no incentive to co-author something, to co-teach, right? To think about breaking down some disciplinary barriers into one course, because again, the incentive structure might be the number of butts you have in seats. And that's actually a measure of what a good teacher you are, right? If there's the demand for your course. So those kinds of things might need to be adjusted. But I think, sorry, your larger question was what other kinds of,
like, are there any incentives that we could try and offer up? And I don't expect you have an answer, by the way, because I've not seen anything out there. I think you're not alone in seeing that there's something messed up here. If we really want this thing over here, we need to find a way to incentivize it. And most of higher ed is really a response to the incentives. And the reports are rarely aligned with what we say we want. I'm just trying to think of, are there any incentives or any specific milestones metrics that you have seen or heard that people are talking about adding to the tenure process that would actually?
Yeah, it's funny. I was interviewing Eric Mazur, the person who kind of created peer instruction at Harvard. He's the physics professor who realized like none of his students were actually learning because he was teaching it to them in the way that an expert talks to other experts, and he forgot what it's like to learn these sort of foundational pieces. So he has the learners themselves teach one another. And I was asking him like why more Harvard professors don't actually leverage his peer instruction methodology when you can get like 3 times sort of the outcomes, like in terms of improvement of student learning outcomes. And he said something fascinating, which was, the same idea of like, why in the world would I, as a faculty member, change everything that I do if everything is measured in this way? But he also said, if someone is failing 10, 15, 20 years out from now, I don't ever see that, right? Like, I don't ever see that as a faculty member when someone is not making a successful transition into the workforce. And so I think there are some unique conversations happening around the work outcomes of, and thinking about mobility for our learners. I think that could be a pretty fascinating model. But yeah, I think in the near term, sort of the smaller steps to getting there is taking models like the Grand Challenges Scholars Program, right, which works really well for engineering, where they're trying to break down silos. But there's no reason why you can't do that for humanities disciplines as well, right? So like, how do you get people to engage with the problem of poverty or hunger? And then in the context of that, you learn the role of literature and history and anthropology and all these things.
Yeah, that's great, because I think anytime that an incentive is talked about and around this kind of general space, the threat is that it only incentivizes the types of students who go into a type of career that pays more money, because we don't really know how to measure the other stuff. It seems a little too hard. So we're going to resort to just focusing on financial outcomes. But I think that, I think that we're getting more nuanced data. We're getting a more informed perspective of what a contributing member of society and a well-prepared graduate look like. And it's not as narrow as just income. But I also think, in general, I feel like these spaces, it's more, the criticisms of any measure are often because they assume that someone's going to design this and it's not collaborative. Like, you can't actually help kind of make it better. And I just feel like faculty across the spectrum should feel like they have the freedom to engage and help us kind of yes and the measures and make them better. Fine. Okay, let's not just incentivize income or certain degree fields. Let's figure out how to add more nuance to it, so that it could be something that would actually, align with the thing that kind of makes you come alive in the classroom when you watch a student really wake up for the first time and really kind of have those ahas. Well, great. Let's figure out how we actually can put in those.
Yeah, that's really important. Like, the measure of value absolutely is not just, economic returns, although that is more and more an element just because of the cost of education, but, value, relevance, life skills learned, right? These are the things that consumers actually are seeking. And so like, you can have an education major who is not earning a lot of money, but is deeply satisfied with the work that they're doing, right? And how is that counted?
Love it. Okay. So this has been super interesting, and we've had lots of folks watching with us live. Thanks for sticking around. I just have two final questions. Hot seat. One, do you have any hot tips or tricks that actually help you navigate the overwhelm of workflow? Is there anything that you would throw out there to share with our community that is helping you kind of manage the zillion emails and constant life that you live?
Yeah, I actually I block out chunks of my day, just like 2-hour chunks, because I used to do sort of days filled with back-to-back meetings, and they would just completely kill me. And then I would end up having to work through the night to just catch up on emails. So the thing that really rejuvenates me is getting to be able to write. So I'm writing, a book. We do a lot of research. And so to actually carve out time specifically for that and to turn off email. And then I've also actually, because as you can see, I work from home. I travel a lot, but then I work from home. And so what I do is recently I actually stopped my kids after school daycare and have them come home on the bus at a normal hour. And then it forces me to actually stop working at a normal hour. I used to kind of keep working. It's hard to kind of shut off when your office is in your home. So that's been my new tactic also, is to try to force some balance in my life, and my kids just come in at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, no, boundaries and structured time. I've been trying to do this where it's project time or email time, but that's smart. I'm always curious when I see someone who is just always so responsive. I'm always curious, like, when in your life are you able to write that many thoughtful emails? Because it's either my fat thumbs are responding as I walk, or occasionally, or frankly, if I'm on an airplane, or just like kind of breathlessly in between meetings. So love that. Last piece, travel tip or hack that helps you, because you travel as much or more than I do. Anything that makes that easier for you?
Yeah, well, I don't know if this is so helpful for men, but for women, I've actually just use a lot of scarves because it doubles as a blanket. I'm always freezing on planes, or if there's a terrible smell, you can wrap your face in the scarf.
That's great. No, that's good. I like it. This is good. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Dr. Michelle Weise. This has been super helpful and great discussion, and you validated projects that we're thinking about. So really, it's pretty awesome for a Monday morning. And thanks to you for watching us live. And if you have other questions for Michelle, go ahead and put them below. And also, I've linked her. You can reach her at our
Michelle.
Our W Michelle at on Twitter. I've linked her in the headline, and then Strada Education Network, which you should be able to find on most platforms, and they're also going to be linked on this. So we have loved this time together, and thanks again for making the time to share with us what you know and what you're seeing in the field.
Thanks, Bridget.
All right, awesome.
Bye.